Now that we've built our API, we're going to go ahead and deploy it to Heroku, which is a platform as a service tool that allows us to deploy our APIs in a very simple way. So we're going to be using GUnicorn as our HTTP server in production. Now let's point over to our production configuration. So I'll go to our configuration within config and in the config module. And I'm going to change our production config. So we have 3 classes for test as well as our development config. Now we're going to go ahead and change our production config. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'll actually copy both of these variables right here, the SQL database URI as well as the SQL alchemy track modifications. So after copying them, I'll remove my first statement. I'll copy them, paste them. So what we want to do is to read our database URL as an environment variable. So since we are using Python decouple, this is going to be easy. So I'm going to change our database config. I'll just come right here, and what I'll do is that we're going to read our config. So I'll say config, and then I'll set this to database URL. Now after doing this, I'll leave our SQL alchemy track modifications to false. Now another thing I'm going to do is to change our debug to an environment variable. So to do that, I'll just add debug. So this will actually be debug, and this will be equal to config, and then you shall say this is going to be our debug value from our environment variables. But what we shall do is to cast this to a boolean, since we are going to read it as a string. So what I'll do in this case is to say cast is going to be equal to bool, since we want it as a boolean. Now after doing this, I'm going to save, and after saving, then I'm going to head over to our init.py, and then we set up our application. It's actually going to be within our run-server.py. So when I go to run-server.py, right now we have our application instance right here, which is the instance that's going to run our app. So we can use this instance to basically tell it that this is the configuration we're going to use, and in this case I'm meaning the production configuration. So this create app function takes in the config, and by default our configuration is the one for development, just like you can see right there. So what we're going to do is to set up this application instance so that you can be able to use it with our production config. So to do that, I'll just come right here and say from API. So I'm going to import our config dictionary, which we have right here. So I'll just come right here, and what I'll do is say from API.config, then .config, I'm just going to import our config dictionary. And right after importing our config dictionary, I'm going to go ahead and point to our application config for production. So I'll just come and say that our config, in this case, is going to be equal to config dictionary, and then we shall access our configuration for production. So our application for production, our configuration for production has the key of production. So I'll just come right here and add it. I'll say production, and then we are good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And after saving this, we're going to go ahead and set up our Heroku app, which we're going to use to deploy our entire project. So I'll just come to Heroku right here. This is my dashboard, and these are a number of apps I have. So what I'll do is to create a new app. And right after creating a new app, we're going to choose a name for this app. So I'll just come right here and say, so this is going to be Flask. So let's say we're going to call it Flask API. So this seems to be taken, so we shall try something like Flask Pizza Delivery. And this seems not to be taken, so we shall create this app. So right after creating our app, we're going to go ahead and set up our remote database. So we're going to be using PostgreSQL in our database, in our production environment. So what I'm going to do is to head over to our resources, and within our resources, I'm going to go ahead and configure our add-ons. So right here we have a search form for add-ons. So I'll just come right here, and what I'll do is to search for Postgres. So we have the first as Heroku Postgres. So the beauty is Heroku Postgres is free, and we can be able to use it in our apps. So what I'll do is to submit this order form. And after submitting this order form, then we now see that our Heroku database has been attached and it's free of charge. So I'm going to head over to our settings. So I'll just come to our settings right here. And within our settings, I'm going to go to reveal config bus. So right now we see that we have our database URL, and it is in this form of Heroku Postgres. So after doing this, then what we're going to do is to also set up our database URL as we're going to be using Flask SQL Alchemy. So the first thing we're going to do is to be able to change our URL from the format that's given to us by Heroku to the format that Flask SQL Alchemy works with. So there has always been a problem whereby we are given a URL by Heroku, but then you cannot be able to use it in our Flask SQL Alchemy database configuration. So I've come across this help on the Heroku website, and they advise us to change our URL in such a format so that we can be able to use our URL efficiently with Flask SQL Alchemy. So I'll come to our application code right here, and what I'll do is to be able to change our database URL using the code you've given us. So I'll head over to config, and what I'll do is to come right at the top of our code, so I'm going to be making use of this code. So what I'm going to do is to come right here, and what I'll do is to change this. So I'll just come right here and say I'm going to paste what we have here. So what we have is actually getting a database URL from an environment variable, and if it starts with Postgres, then we have to change it to PostgreSQL because that's the format that's supported by Flask SQL Alchemy. So I'm going to change this. So right now for us we're using Python decouple, so I'll just come and change this to config, and then we shall have our database URL. So instead of using database URL as our SQL Alchemy database URL, I'm going to change this to something like our URI. So I'm going to actually get the value of our URI, and I'll set it to our SQL Alchemy database URI. So I'll just come right here and change our URI to our SQL Alchemy database URI. So after doing that, then I'm going to go ahead and create a Git repository, as we're going to be using GitHub to be able to commit our code as well as to enable automatic deploys. So what I'm going to do is come to the terminal right here and make sure you have Git installed. So I'll just come and say Git init. So this is going to initialize or create a Git repository within our project. Now we're going to be able to use Git to deploy our application to Heroku. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to come right here. So we have a .ignore file. So this .gitignore file is a file that allows us to ignore some files and not push them to our application production or to GitHub. So I'll just come right here, and then I'll come to our Chrome. So I'll just search for .gitignore. So I'll search the one for Python. And this is going to give us all the stuff that you may need to neglect while committing to GitHub. So I'll just come right here and look for the python.gitignore. So the Python gitignore has all this, so I'll just come and copy everything from this file. And after copying everything, I'm simply going to paste it within our .gitignore, and we are good to go. So after doing this, I'm going to go ahead and commit our file. So I'll just come right here and I'll say git commit -m. So I'll provide that message. The message is going to be, let's say, initial commit. And right now we have to actually stage this for committing. So I'll just come and say git add all. So after adding them, I'll then commit. So I'll just come right here and commit our code. So after committing this, then I'm going to go ahead and also check for our requirements. So right now, we have been able to create a Git repository within our code. Now we're going to go ahead and set up our Heroku configuration. So I'm going to come to our project folder, and then I'll create a new file. So I'm going to create a new file, which I'm going to call the pro file. So a proc file is simply a file that will allow us to actually run our server in production. So it simply contains that command that enables us to run our web server in production. So right now we're going to be using gUnicorn, which is our HTTP server that's going to allow us to run our application in production. So I'll just come right here and first install gUnicorn. I'll actually go to my terminal right here. So I'll just say pip install gUnicorn. So this will go ahead and set up gUnicorn within our environment. So we're going to install gUnicorn. And after installing gUnicorn, I'm going to freeze it to our requirements.txt. So I'll just come right here and click freeze to our requirements. .txt. So right after doing this, I'm going to go ahead and basically set up our configuration. So I'll just come right here and say web, and then write the command that's going to run our application using GUndercon. So I'm going to say GUndercon, and then I'm going to look for the app instance. So we have our app instance in our run server.py. So I'll call our app instance by calling our module, which is run server. So I'm just going to say run server, and then I'll specify that what we want is our application instance, which is app, and that is our app instance right here. So after doing that, then I'm going to go ahead and save. So right after doing this, I'm going to go ahead and also provide some of the other necessary requirements that we need for our application to run on Heroku. So I'm going to start with the requirements.txt. So the requirements.txt contains just a list of all the dependencies our project runs on. So I'm also going to go ahead and install the database driver that's going to allow our application to work with Postgres. So I'll just come right here and I'll say pip install. So this is going to be this name I can't read well, so it's actually going to be G2, install the binary. So this is going to allow us to run Postgres with our Flask SQL. After setting this up, it seems like I already installed it. So I'm going to go ahead and also freeze it to our requirements.txt. I think we have it. So if I say pip list, so it seems like we already have it right here. Yeah, it's already installed. So I'm going to go ahead and set this up. So I'll just come right here and I'll add. So we have our requirements.txt file. So I'm also going to create another file that's going to tell Heroku which version of Python you want to use. So in this case, I'll just come and create that file right here. And I'm going to call it runtime.txt. So I'm going to specify a version of Python. So I'll just say Python. So when I come right here and say Python, so we have Python 3.10. So I'll just come right here and say Python 3.10.0. I'm going to save this. And right after doing this, I'm going to go ahead and also set up our, so we have our runtime.txt, we have our profile, we have our requirements.txt. We also did ignore everything. So I'm going to come right here in our .env, and I'm going to change to actually put this in our production environment variable. So I'll begin with our secret key right here. And when I go back here, I'll go to our application and then to our settings. So right here in our configuration variables, I'm going to add our secret key. So I'm going to get a value for our secret key. So I'm just going to say Python. Then I'm going to use secrets. So I'll say import secrets, and then I'll generate our secret key by using token X. So this will generate the hexadecimal value that we're going to use as our secret. So I'm just going to come right here and I'm going to copy this. So I'll paste it right in there and then add. I'll do the same thing for our JWT secret key. So I'll just come right here and run the command again. So I'll copy our JWT secret right here and then I'll paste it there. So I'll say JWT secret key. So I'm going to actually generate this random hexadecimal string again, and then I'll paste it right in here. So I'll add it. So after adding it, then I'm going to go ahead and close this. So after setting this up, remember that we also set up our production configuration variable. So for example, if we go to our debug, we'll set it up to be an environment variable. So I'll just come right here and also say that we're going to have our debug. And in this case, we shall set our debug to false. So I'll say false. So this is going to be a string that shall be read as a boolean because we passed it to a boolean. So I'm going to go ahead and add this. So after adding this, then what I'll do is to basically go ahead and create a Git repository where we shall going to add our code. So I'll come to our GitHub. So I'll say github.com. And then I'm going to go to my repository. So I'll add a new repository. So I'm going to call this Flask So I'll actually say Flask Pizza Delivery API. So it seems like this is our name that exists. So I'll give it a description. This is a REST API. So I'll say this is a REST API for pizza delivery service. So I'll say pizza delivery service. And then I'm going to go ahead and create this repository. So after creating this repository, I'm going to copy our remote URL. So this is a remote URL to our Git repository. And then I'm going to set it up so that you can be able to use our remote Git repository. So after copying this URL, I'm going to come within our VS Code. So I'm going to set this up by saying git remote. And I'm going to say remote origin. Actually, it's going to be remote add origin. And then I'm going to paste in our remote URL. And after adding our remote URL, then we're going to go ahead and also rename our branch. So I want to use our main branch as the main branch or as the master branch. So I'll just come right here and say git branch, and then I'll rename it to main. So after renaming this to main, then I'm going to go ahead and push our code to GitHub. So to do that, I'm actually going to come right here. So it seems like we have some changes that we haven't committed. So I'll state them by saying git add all, and then I'll say git commit, and this is going to actually be Heroku. Let me actually say Heroku commit. So after doing this, then I'm going to go ahead and basically push this to production. So I'll do that by saying git push u, and then I'll specify that our origin is going to be the main branch and our remote repository. So this is actually going to push our code to GitHub. Alright, so now that our code has been pushed to GitHub, we can be able to access it to in our GitHub. So what we're going to do is connect our GitHub repository to Heroku and then do deployments from our GitHub. So I'll just come right here on our app on Heroku. So I'll go to the deploy section or the deploy tab, and then I'll go to GitHub. So right here, we are going to be told to search for the repository to connect to. So I'll just come right here and say Flask. So this is actually going to be Flask Pizza Delivery. I'm going to search. So it's actually going to be our repository for Flask Pizza Delivery API. So I'm going to connect to this. And after connecting to this, then I'm going to go ahead and enable automatic deploys. If you have some CI/CD, you can even basically configure it from here. Now I'm going to also first deploy this. So I'm just going to come right here and say deploy branch. So right now we can even view our build log. So I'm just going to go to view build log. So now we see that our requirements are actually being installed. So now our application has been deployed. So when you go to open app, so right now we see that our UI has been actually deployed. So let's actually check if our database is working. So to do that, I'm just going to come to our Flask Delivery API. Then I'm going to go to more. So right here, I'm going to go to more, and then I'll go to run console. So the beauty is you can be able to run our bash console in the web interface. So I'll just say Heroku run bash and then run. So right now we have our bash terminal. So in ls, we see our application code right here. So I can actually go ahead and create a database. So let's say I'm going to export our Flask app. Shall we say export Flask app? So I'm going to export our Flask app to our run server.py. This is actually going to be our run server.py. And I'm going to come and say Flask and then shell. So right now we see our Python console has been open, so we can actually view our order model. We can even view our user model. Now to check if our database is actually working, what we're going to do is to say, I'm just going to create a simple query. So I'm going to say order.query.all. Right now we see that the table has not actually been created. So let's see our relation orders does not exist. So to fix this, what we're going to do is create our table. So I'll just do that by simply saying db. So we have our db instance as well. So I can say db.create all. And this is going to go ahead and basically create our database table. So if I come here and say order, right now we can see our order model. So if I query, let's say order.query.all, let's actually see. So current transaction is aborted until the end of transaction block. So let me actually first exit this. So I'm actually going to save Flask shell again. And let's say if I try to query for our order, so in this case I'll say order.query. So it's going to be query. Then I'll come here and say .all. So right now we see that we have an empty list of orders. So if we do the same thing for users, so I can say user.query.all. So right now we have an empty list of users. So after doing this, then I'm going to just close the console. So I'm just going to come right here, and what I'll do is to head over to our Deployed API. I'm going to refresh. When I refresh right here, we have our order routes. We also have our authentication route. So let's try to create a user. So I'm going to come and sign up, and I'm going to try this out. So I'm going to provide a username. So let's say I'm going to provide a username as test user, and I'm going to provide an email as well. So let's say our email is going to be testuser123@gmail.com. I'm going to come and provide a password as well. So the password in this case is going to be a password. So let me actually provide a password of password123. So after doing this, I'm going to come and execute this. So right now we see that our user has been created and we get a 201 status code. So right after creating our user, then I'm going to go ahead and basically try to authenticate. So I'll come to our login. So I'm going to go to our login endpoint, and when I come to our login, I provide our email. So our email is going to be test user. So I'll actually see from here. So we actually created the user as testuser123@gmail.com. So I'm just going to come and say @gmail.com. And right now I'm going to come and also provide our password. So our password is going to be password. So let me actually see the password that you provided. So the password was password123 as well. And I'm going to go ahead and execute this. So when I execute right now, we see that our access token and our refresh token have been provided. So I'm just going to come right here. I'm going to copy this code. The access token. And then I'll come and authorize. So I'll come right here and provide this. So I'll say bearer. And then our token. So I'll come and authorize. So let's try to actually access a protected endpoint. So I'm going to try to query for all orders. So I'm just going to come right here and get all orders. I'm going to try this out. So right now we see an empty list or an empty query set returned to us, which means our stuff is working. So I'm going to try to create an order. So I'll place a new order. So I'll just come and try this out. So I'm actually going to say, I'm going to have, let's say, size small. So I'll actually add our flavor as well as our quantity. So let me actually try this. So let me actually try this out. I'm going to try this. So I'm actually going to create my own JSON object. So in this JSON object, I'm going to come right here. I'll specify that our size is going to be, let's say, medium. And then I'll come right here, and what I'll do is to also specify that our quantity. So I'll come right here and say our quantity is going to be, let's say, 2. And then I also provide, let's say, our flavor. So let's say our flavor age will be equal to let's say chicken, whatever flavor. Then I'm just going to come right here and close our JSON object. So let's try to send. So when I try to send this, right now we see that our order has been created. So let's say if you wanted to actually get all orders, so when you get all orders, right now when you execute, you can be able to see that our order has been added to our database. So in this video, we've been able to deploy our API to Heroku. We've also been able to look into the different things such as setting up our database in production. Thank you for watching, and if you like this series of videos, please leave a like, comment, tell me what you feel about this whole thing, and please don't forget to subscribe. I'm really grateful. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next videos. Bye.